Shalom, shalom. This is Brother Abishai, wfiEurope, and today we're going to be going into a breakdown on can we eat unclean meats? This is a stronghold in Christianity that, Christ in the books of Matthew 15, Mark 7, magically made that which was unclean, clean. And yeah, it's a stronghold in Christianity that we can eat whatever we want. But, when we go through the scriptures, it's not so. And this is a little breakdown on why we can't eat unclean meats as per the scriptures. So the first precept I want to go to is the book of First Corinthians 3 and verse 16. If a brother can pull that up. Bear with me. So the reason why this is important, okay, is that God has given us a law, okay, and we're required to uphold that law to the best of our abilities as per the scriptures. And the reason why this topic in specifically is really important is that it's one of those doctrines that really have a stronghold on our people, that we can eat whatever we want to eat and so on and so forth, but that's not the case. So the book of First Corinthians 3 and verse 16, and it reads, "Know ye not that ye are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwelleth in you? If any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy. For the temple of God is holy, which temple ye are." So we are the temple of God. Okay. Now, despite what many people might think that when you go to church or when you go to certain buildings, these are, where God dwells at. But the scriptures tells us that God doesn't dwell in places built by the hands of men. Rather, he dwells in us. And we have to keep our temples clean by not defiling it. Now, I'm going to go through certain scriptures to show you that we can eat unclean meats. First and foremost, I want to go into the definition of what is food, because that's what people say. We can eat any food in the world, but when you actually go into the definitions, we know that not everything is food. So if a brother can pull up the definition of food.
It reads, food, any nutritious substance that people or animals eat or drink, or that plants absorb in order to maintain life and growth.
So food, the definition of food is things that we eat or drink to maintain life and that's nutritious unto our body. Now, despite what many people think, not everything is food. And if you have any common sense whatsoever, you should understand that not everything is food. You can't just put anything in your mouth and live off it, you know. And logically speaking, and science will even tell you that when you go in these shops, okay, most of the things that you see aren't food. It's a bunch of processed sugars and plastics and whatever that's being shaped in the form of food, but it has no nutritional substance to your body. It doesn't benefit you anyway, you know. And the Most High God, He's given us things to eat to maintain our life, and to things that are going to prosper us and help make us healthy. You know, if for example, logically speaking, if you were to say that anything is food and that God made everything okay to eat, logically speaking, if you eat bats or cats or dogs or animals that aren't made for the human consumption, you're gonna get sick. Why? Because not everything is food. Not everything is made for the body to consume. There are things that your body can't digest. So we're gonna go to the precepts. Okay, what is food biblically speaking? God has told us what is food in the scriptures. I want to go to the book of Leviticus, chapter to verse 7. Leviticus 11, verse 1 to 7.
Okay, you want me to read that?
Can
I'll put it up as well. Leviticus 11 and 7.
Leviticus 11, verse 1 down to 7, please.
It's the book of Leviticus, chapter 11 and verse 1. And it reads, "And the Lord spake unto Moses and to Aaron, saying unto them, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, These are the beasts which ye shall eat among all the beasts that are on the earth.
So
What's
stop right there for a second, put me a second. So it says that the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, okay, to tell the children of Israel what beasts you can eat. So that right there sets a premise, okay, for what the Lord is going to define as food. You know, food is something that you can eat. Again, if you can't eat something, then it's not food. So we're going to use these precepts to later help us have a context on what Christ means in the later verses, because you know the words of Christ have been misconstrued for lawless individuals to just stuff their faces with, hog mog and porks and bacon and all manner of just abomination and filthiness. But the Lord is not dealing with that. Okay, so we're going to see the premise of what is food, what we can eat. Read on.
verse 3? Whatsoever part of the hoof and is cloven footed and cheweth the cud among the beasts, that shall ye eat.
So
Nevertheless,
that's what we can eat. And you go.
can. Verse 4, nevertheless, these shall ye not eat, of them that chew the cud, or of them that divide the hoof, as the camel, because he cheweth the cud, but divideth not the hoof, he is unclean unto you. And the coney, because he cheweth the cud, but divideth not the hoof, he is unclean unto you. And the hare, because he cheweth the cud, but divideth not the hoof, he is unclean unto you. And the swine, though he divideth the hoof, and be cloven footed, yet he cheweth not the cud, he is unclean to you.
Now, I bet, when verse 7 was read, it mentions the swine is unclean. I bet a lot of people close their books and, they're ready to close this live because, the swine specifically is the meat that just has people in a chokehold. Literally, people literally are choking on this swine flesh because, the Lord's, it's a symbol from the Lord that you can't be eating this meat. The swine is something that really is the greatest stronghold on the body of Christ. But the Lord, we're going to show you that He says we can't eat swine. He just read it out, but we're going to use the precepts to further exacerbate why we can't eat the swine's flesh. So Christ upheld the law, okay? Despite what many people said, despite what many people think about Christ, abolishing the law or making it null, Christ upheld the law. If a brother can go to the book of John chapter 7 and verse 16.
It's the book of John, chapter 7, and verse number 16, you say, yeah?
Can.
And it reads, Yahushua answered them, my doctrine is not mine, but his that sent me.
So again, okay, Christ didn't come to teach his own doctrines because many people think that Christ came and taught a different doctrine from what God taught in the Old Testament. But that's not so. Christ came and taught what his Father taught. It's his doctrines that are based off his Father's. If you read Matthew 5 or 17.
It's the book of Matthew, chapter 5 and verse 17. It's the book of Matthew, chapter 5 and verse 17, and it reads, think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill.
So when it says that Christ came not to destroy but to fulfill, it means that he never came to come to an end. He came to carry out what was required of the law. So he never, because many people interpret this verse to mean, don't think that I've come to fulfill, don't think I've come to destroy, but to destroy, because they interpret that word to fulfill as to bring it to an end. But that's not so. Christ came to carry it out and show us how we're meant to carry the law. Read on. Verse 18, Brother Kasha.
Verse 18, and it reads, for verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled.
Like it.
Can't. So I'll read that again. Matthew 5 and verse number 18. And it reads, "For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled." Right. And this is obviously very clear. And I think a lot of Christians really see past this, especially when we're dealing with our own people, you know, tend to read verse 17 and not understand what the meaning of the word fulfill even means. It's just, when we really go into it, the word, it means to carry out, right? And even verse 18 gives us the further explanation when it says, till heaven and earth pass. I'm sure if we were to now look outside of our windows, wherever we are in the world, wherever you're watching the video, or reading this verse, you'll see that heaven and earth hasn't passed. So the next line then says, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law. So not one bit, not one tiny bit, right, is going to pass from the law, right? And it says till all be fulfilled. So till everything's been fulfilled, right? And we haven't gone through tribulation yet. So there's many things that are yet to happen, right? There's many things that are yet to happen for everything to be fulfilled, right? So this is just this verse here. Christians really don't like to read past this. Especially when we're dealing with our people, they don't like to read past this point, right? So, and then obviously in verse 19 touches on the same point, right? But yeah, brother, you got it.
Third. Yeah, so Christ, he clearly establishes the importance of the law, that he's not come to destroy it, but to uphold it. And, Christ taught the doctrine of his Father. So whenever we see in the scriptures that people maybe contradict, what Christ said to what his Father said in times past, we know that that's not the case, because Christ taught what his Father taught. So if we make Christ teach against what his Father taught, we make Christ out to be a liar and a hypocrite. So let's see what his Father says in the book of Isaiah, chapter 66 and verse 17.
Lakia, do you want me to finish that on verse 19 as well?
Yeah, finish that, please.
I think it's important to highlight that on verse 19. Right? It reads in verse 19, "Whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven." You can break it.
So there's a reward for teaching and upholding the commandments of Most High God, but there's also a punishment if we teach against them. And many people in this day and age are trying to find whatever way they can to interpret the scriptures in the way that they want the scriptures to be interpreted, rather than allowing the scriptures to interpret how we're meant to live. Because people want shortcuts in this life, and there's no other way. There's no better shortcut than saying we can eat whatever we want. Because life is our life is dependent on what we eat, and if we want a good quality of life, then we have to eat the things that God has made permissible. Because you see what happens when we eat foods that are unlawful, for example, such as bats, cats, dogs, horses. These things bring sickness upon our bodies because they're not meant for human consumption, especially that of the swine. But if the brother can go Isaiah 66 verse 17, please. And that's also a great precept in showing that Christ taught in context of the law, because he came to fulfill it out.
You want me to start at verse 15 or you want me to go straight into the point?
Yeah, verse 15, that's a good precept to begin with.
This is the book of Isaiah, chapter 66 and verse 15. "For behold, the Lord will come with fire, and with his chariots like a whirlwind, to render his anger with fury, and his rebuke with flames of fire. For by fire and by his sword will the Lord plead with all flesh, and the slain of the Lord shall be many." Verse 17, they that sanctify themselves and purify themselves in the gardens behind one tree in the midst, eating swine's flesh, and the abomination and the mouse shall be consumed together, saith the Lord.
So this precept, okay, is going into what's going to happen in the latter days, and it speaks about how the Lord is going to cut down those who He finds defiled, those who He finds, not keeping His commandments and eating the meats that He says are unclean, the swine's flesh and the abomination and the mouse. And I noticed that this is in the latter days, so this is already after, this is happening after the resurrection of Christ. And we see that it was during the time of Christ that people would take his teachings and say that we can eat whatever we want, but we're going to further go into a deeper exegesis on why that's not so. But notice the premise, okay, that at the latter days, at the end of the world, okay, the words of the Most High God, He says that He's going to cut down those who He finds unclean and defiled. And when we read the precepts that Christ taught the doctrine of His Father, in John chapter 7 and verse 16. So, we see that there's many contradictions that Christians, present in their doctrines. But I want to go to Genesis chapter 7 and verse 2 and give a deeper understanding. If you read Genesis 7, 1 to 2, please.
It's the book of Genesis, chapter 7, and verse number 1. And the Lord said unto Noah, come thou and all thy house into the ark, for thee have I seen righteous before me in this generation. Of every clean beast thou shalt take to thee by sevens, the male and his female, and of beasts that are not clean by two, the male and his female.
So, I hope some brothers can understand where I'm going with this. So from the very, very get-go, we already had animals that were clean and animals that were unclean. Many people misinterpret the teachings of Moses to say that Moses was the one that brought us, what animals are clean and what animals are unclean. But way before Moses, there was already a premise that God set for animals that were clean and unclean. And we see that in the book of Isaiah, chapter 66 and verse 17, that in the latter days, that there's going to be people who are going to, be destroyed for eating abominable foods that are unclean, such as the swine and the mouse. So notice how Noah, at the beginning of the world, had animals that were clean and unclean, and at the end of the world, there are animals that are unclean. So how is it that Christians misinterpret the teachings of Christ to say that He made animals clean in the middle of this, in the middle of this, what I'm saying? Like, you've got animals that are unclean at the beginning of the world, animals are unclean at the end of the world, yet somehow Christ made all animals clean. That can only show that whatever Christians interpret Christ to say in the books of Matthew 15, Mark chapter 7, etc., and the Apostles, is a clear misinterpretation of the scriptures. I'm going to go into that now. So if the brother can go to the book of Matthew chapter 15 and verse 11, Babakasha. This precept is a stronghold that many Christians use to justify the eatings of unclean animals. But as per 2 Timothy 2 and verse 15, we're going to study to show ourselves approved. And we're going to prove all things, such as First Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 17. So if the brother can go Matthew 15 and verse 11, Babakasha.
And it reads, Matthew 15 and 11, not that which goeth into the mouth defileth a man, but that which cometh out of the mouth, this defileth a man.
So solely this single verse, this verse can be led to make one believe that, it's not that there's nothing there's nothing that can go into our mouths that can defile us. But when we go through a deeper exegesis and we find the context of what's being said in this chapter, we see that this is not so. So if the brother can go Matthew 15 and read verses 1 to 2.
Matthew 15 and verse 1. Then came to Yahushua scribes and Pharisees, which were of Jerusalem, saying, why do the disciples transgress the tradition of their elders? For they wash not their hands when they eat bread.
So the context, okay, we see that the disciples, are being accused of, breaking the traditions of the elders by eating bread with unwashed hands by the Pharisees. That's the context of this verse. Is about eating bread with unwashed hands. Now, notice if Christ or the Most High God wanted to avoid confusion, he could have easily admitted that they were eating swine's flesh or they were eating animals that were unlawful. But it's clear upon tables that they're eating food that's lawful, but just with unclean hands. Therefore, the Pharisees saw that food was unclean. So that's the context of this verse. And when we go, if we go on down to verse 20, verse 17 to verse 20, we understand what Christ is saying. This verse is it's not rocket science. It's not hard to interpret what's going on. It's simple, biblical arithmetic, but people avoid and refuse to open their eyes to because they want to justify the unlawful lifestyles. But it's plain upon tables that we see that Christ has always taught in context of the law, and whenever he says, there's nothing from without, it's in context of his Father's law because Christ taught the law. But some people think that Christ has to, name every single law for them to have an understanding of what he means. But it doesn't have to be so. We understand what Christ came to do and that he taught his Father's law. So if we read verse 17 to 20, Babakasha. Start from verse 15. Matthew 15 and verse 15 to verse 20. Okay, I'll just go for it.
Oh, Salakia, I'm muted, Salakia.
Oh, okay, that's nice.
Salakia. Matthew 15 and verse 15. Then answered Peter and said unto him, declare unto us this parable. And Yahushua said, are ye also yet without understanding? Do not ye yet understand that whatsoever entereth in at the mouth goeth into the belly, and is cast out into the drought?
Pause. So you see, okay, do you not understand that whatsoever entereth in at the mouth goeth into the belly and is cast out into the jaw? Now, that whatsoever is a key stumbling block that Christians fall. That whatsoever. See that Christ said we can eat whatsoever, but we understand that Christ, he's not being literal because that whatsoever could end up could end up being really dangerous for us. Because whatsoever, does that mean that we can eat whatever we want? Does that mean that we can eat bats and rats and all these unclean animals that the Most High said is unpermissible? No, that's not what Christ was saying. That whatsoever is contextual and contextual in the law of Moses. That because Moses already sent to us what is lawful to eat, what is regarded as food. So, for example, if I said to somebody, you can cook whatever you want, that whatever, I'm not being literal and saying that they can cook stones for my dinner. You know what I'm saying? They can eat, they can cook grass or some sand. That whatsoever is in context of what is deemed as food. And Christ is deeming what is lawful, as food. So it's not rocket science. We're going to go further into the precept. So why we know this is so. But read on.
Khan, verse 18. But those things which proceed out of the mouth come forth from the heart, and they defile the man. For out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. These are the things which defile a man. But to eat with unwashen hands defileth not a man.
You see that? And Christ brings back the context of the chapter. You see that? He says, these are the things which defile a man, but to eat with unwashed hands defileth not a man. So notice how he never said that, to eat pork doesn't defile you, or to eat bats, or to eat things that are deemed unlawful in the law of Moses. These are the things that don't defile you. No, Christ, the whole context, okay, it's a beautiful chapter, which is a shame that Christians have perverted to just, justify eating, bacon. It's It's speaking about unwashing hands, and we're going to prove this is so, because if this is meaning we eat whatever we want, then Christ is a contradiction. The apostles later on contradict what Christ has taught here, and not only that, but Christ himself to contradict what he's taught here. If it means that we can eat whatever we want, if the brother can go to the book of Acts chapter 15 and verse 19, Barakasha.
Say Acts 15 and verse
15 and verse 19.
right, and it reads, Acts 15 and verse 19, wherefore my sentence is that we trouble not them which from among the Gentiles are turned to God, but that we write unto them that they abstain from pollutions of idols, from fornication, and from things strangled, and from blood.
So notice how, one of the requirements that the apostles gave the newly turned Gentiles to keep are things to avoid things strangled and from blood. Now, Christ said that it's not what we can eat whatever we want. You know what I'm saying? Christ apparently says that we can eat whatever we want according to the Christian doctrine. But why is it so that the apostles are telling the Gentiles to abstain from things strangled and from things that have blood in it? If Christ said we can eat whatever we want, unless the apostles knew that Christ taught within a context, and that cultural context was that which was held at the time, which is the law of Moses, which is still held today, that we can only eat the things that are permissible by God. And where did the apostles get this doctrine from? They get it from the law. If a brother can go to the book of Leviticus, chapter 7 and verse 26. Leviticus
So like
7 and verse 26.
and it reads, moreover, ye shall eat no manner of blood, whether it be of fowl or of beast, in any of your dwellings.
Read on.
Can. Whatsoever soul it be that eateth any manner of blood, even that soul shall be cut off from his people.
So if Christ is being literal in the books of Matthew 15 and Mark chapter 7, saying that we can eat whatever we want, then why is it that the apostles are upholding the law that Moses gave us, unless Christ was speaking in a contextual manner? Because we saw that in the book of Isaiah, chapter 66 and verse 17, that at the latter days of the world, after Christ, has has died, been buried, and resurrected, that Christ, the Most High God, is going to kill those who he finds unclean eating swine's flesh. Why is that so? If Christ, made all foods clean, or is that a contradiction in the Bible? That's one thing that Christians have to expound on and thoroughly prove that Christ has changed laws like that. Because Christ, that's not what he's done. Christ taught the doctrine of, and the apostles upheld it as well in the book of Acts, chapter 15. If a brother can go Leviticus 17 and verse 10 as well.
What verse you want, Babakshah?
17 and verse 10.
It's the book of Leviticus, chapter 17 and verse 10. And it reads, whatsoever man there be of the house of Israel, or of the strangers that sojourn among you, that eateth any manner of blood, I will even set my face against that soul that eateth blood, and will cut him off from among his people.
Can. So again, there's a premise of the things that we can eat and what we can't eat, even in the New Testament, that Christ doesn't just do away with the law. He came to magnify it and expound on the law. But Christians have made his teachings to be void through the deceit Because again, Revelation chapter 2 and verse 14, that's a precept I want to go to. If Christ was being literal and saying that whatsoever goeth into our mouth can't defile us, then why does Christ himself say a specific something in the book of Revelation, chapter 2 and verse 14?
Okay. This is the book of Revelation, chapter 2 and verse 14. But I have a few things against thee, because thou hast there them that hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to cast a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed unto idols, and to commit fornication.
So again, Christ is putting emphasis on, being certain sins being, predicated upon the eating of certain meats and unclean things, such as here the eating things sacrificed unto idols. That's just a plain cut that shows you that Christ didn't make all foods clean. Instead, he was speaking about a certain subject in context of another. And many Christians have then interpreted that Christ has said this or that to fit the narrative, but that's not so. Christ always taught the law, and he didn't do away with the law. And in fact, Christ actually goes against those that don't keep the law in the book of Matthew, chapter 7 and verse 21 on down, if a brother can read that.
Okay. It's the book of Matthew, chapter 7 and verse number 21. And it reads, Not everyone that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father which is in heaven.
You see that? So Christ said that only those that do the will of his Father, they are the ones that, are going to be the ones that are justified. And if a brother can get Romans 2 and verse 13 really quickly.
And it's the book of Romans, chapter 2 and verse 13, and it reads, For not the hearers of the law are just before God, but the doers of the law shall be justified.
So those that do the law are the ones that are going to be justified, not the ones that say the law's done away with and we don't have to keep it anymore. That's not so. If you continue reading Matthew chapter 7.
Matthew 7 and verse 22, and it reads, Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, we have not, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name? And in thy name have cast out devils, and in thy name done many wonderful works.
So you see that these people are saying that, Lord, you've cast the devils in your name, and we've done many wonderful works in your name. So these people have, shown signs of the fruits of the spirits. So they've been able to cast out demons and do, magical things, not magical like it, but wonderful things, in the name of the Most High God. So they've been deceived. They've deceived themselves into thinking that they're carrying out the will of God. But that's not so. Read on.
Come. And then will I profess unto them, I never knew you. Depart from me, ye that work iniquity.
Those are work sin. And if you read other translations, that word for iniquity is lawlessness, because there are many people that, who advocate for the law to be done away with, that in the latter days, the Most High is going to turn away from them and say that you've worked lawlessness, which is a very, very sad and but it's a pitiful thing to see. So that's just a little breakdown on why we have to keep the law, and that Christ didn't do away with the dietary law. In fact, he actually upheld it. And I want to quickly end with the last precept, Revelation chapter 18 and verse 2.
I thought you forgot about that one, but it's the book of Revelation, chapter 18 and verse 2. And it reads, And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Behold, the great Slacker, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird.
So that you can't get past that. You can't get past that. How is it so, Kim, that we see, two precepts, Isaiah chapter 66 and verse 17, and Revelation chapter 18 and verse 2, both identifying that are unclean animals at the latter days of the world. So the only way that we can say that Christ made animals unclean, animals that were unclean clean, is if we misinterpret what he said, because we know that Christ taught the doctrine of his Father and that Christ kept the law himself. So how is it so that we can now say that Christ made animals all lawful to eat when we know that's not the case? Even when we read the book of Acts, chapter 15 and verse 19 on down, we see that the apostles still upheld certain requirements of the dietary law, advising those to abstain from blood and food strangled. Because if that whatsoever that Christ said in the book of Matthew, chapter 15, was literal, that means that we can do all manner of lawlessness. That means that we can drink poison. That means that we can, do whatever, because there's nothing from without that can defile us, if that's what we want to say, if we want to be literal. But we know that that's just not the case, because Christ isn't an idiot, and that God is not an author of confusion. Rather, people will misinterpret what he said so they can, damn have a swine fest of a meal. It's just that's going off. And if the Most High catches you, like it says in the book of Isaiah, chapter 66 and verse 17, you'll be turned into metaphorical bacon. So that's a historical breakdown. Lord willing, I was edified. Lord willing, someone took away a precept. Lord willing, someone understands that our vessels are temples of Most High God, and we actually have to watch what we put inside of it, because just like any other machine, it requires certain types of fuel to prosper and perform at its best. And if you're feeding your body rubbish, then it's not going to perform, how the Most High God made it perform, and in turn, it prevents you from magnifying His name the way that He wishes it to be magnified. So can Lord willing, brothers edified again, and yeah, brother Abishai, bye. Shalom.